NBA legend Shaquille O'Neal, known as the Big Shaq, decided to go undercover at one of his own companies, Big Chicken. Unaware of who he actually was, the waiter dished insults and kicked him out of his restaurant. The waiter's world shattered the next day when Shaq came back to the restaurant, not as a black customer, but as the mighty black owner of Big Chicken. The NBA legend was done for the day with his charity work in Las Vegas, Nevada, and decided to take a break in his office. As he stared at the office window, he watched how lively and bubbling the streets of Las Vegas were, and how he had grown accustomed to the city over the years, despite being the most diverse area in the country. Before he took his intended nap, he had more profound thoughts. He recalled how he opened the first Big Chicken restaurant in the vicinity back in 2018. Now it has expanded to different regions and locations around the United States. Big Chicken was known for its oversized sandwiches, golden fries, and friendly service. Or was it? The origin of Big Chicken was a simple one. O'Neal became one of the NBA's most marketable stars in the 1990s, and after his retirement in 2011, he decided to open his first Big Chicken restaurant. To promote the opening, Big Shaq starred in Big Chicken Shaq, a reality TV series that premiered on Facebook Watch on October 6, 2018. It is safe to say that Big Shaq, as a black man, made all the effort and sacrifices possible to ensure that Big Chicken was an established success. And it was. Sitting down in his comfortable chair, Big Shaq called his personal assistant, Mary, for more information on how the Las Vegas branch of Big Chicken was going. To his surprise, it was never what he thought. Mr. Paul, his assistant, came in with the file on LA's Big Chicken. He said, "The profit from this branch went higher by 12% compared to last year's sales." But this wasn't really what Shaq wanted to know. He was much more concerned about the customer's satisfaction. "Thanks, but really what I wanted to know was what the customers are saying," he said to Mr. Paul. This was the moment of truth. Shaq took over the sheet from the nervous Paul and looked through each comment. Shaw loves it when everything he does goes as planned, from his past NBA career to his businesses. Shaq enjoyed all those positive reviews, but came across one that made him pause and think for a second. He saw a review that read, "The cheeseburger was delicious, but I didn't get a chance to put it in my mouth. Why does Big Shaq have a racist waiter?" He continued reading and saw similar reviews about black customers being treated with disdain. He had to do something, so Shaq decided to verify these claims himself. Shaq understood the assignment. Even as wealthy as he is, it hasn't shielded him from the ugliness of racism. His restaurant's acceptance of diversity made it different, but this waiter was getting in his way by standing against what Big Chicken was about. The waiter, Todd, ran the restaurant like he owned a share of the company. Many didn't know why the branch manager, Kevin, who knew about this worker's shenanigans, turned deaf ears. Apparently, Kevin hated confrontation. He wasn't a leader, but just trying to keep the store running. He worried that if he called Todd out, there'd be an argument, or worse, Todd would accuse him of being unfair. In Kevin's little mind, Todd's lousy attitude was overshadowed by his work ethic. Sure, he's rude, but he's good at his job, right? So he had thought. Ready to take action, Shaq could not wait to be at the restaurant the next day. On paper, Todd was a saint, but in some customers' minds, they are dreadful of him. As the night came, Shaq went through his wardrobe, looking for the right clothes to wear. Finally, he found a hoodie with normal design jeans. This was the attire he usually wore during the early days of his NBA career. As soon as he spotted the disguise, he went down memory lane. He smiled with a bit of tears in his eyes. Now the day came. Disguised as just another customer, he walked in with his huge-sized hoodie, glasses on, jeans, and sneakers. He intentionally left his Rolex watch to not give off any rich ideas. He wore a low-class value watch instead. Shaq doing this wasn't just about the waiter, Todd. It was about standing up for what is right. Even if he had become successful, Shaq wishes to end the unspoken belief that a black man doesn't belong in a high-class society unless he has a document to prove otherwise or a platinum card in his pocket. As he walked into his restaurant, something immediately seemed off. Shaq was the only black man in the restaurant. How was that possible? Todd managed to restructure his restaurant to suit his needs. He has to pay for this, Big Shaq thought. He sat on an empty table, waiting for someone to take his order. He could notice all eyes were on him while the employers tried to avoid his table, probably leaving it for Todd. No one approached him. He could feel the familiar sting of invisibility, the same sting he had felt in his youth. The sensation wasn't new, but it was infuriating. About 5 minutes passed, and a white waiter, Todd, with an arrogant smirk, walked up to Shaq, barely looking up from his phone. "What do you want in here, mister? This isn't a charity center, you know? We don't serve food for free here," Todd says, still concentrating on his phone screen. Shaq took all he could to maintain his cover. He had wished he could immediately reveal who he was at that instance and embarrass the waiter. "I'd like to have an attack chicken sandwich and some fries, please," Shaq responded. Todd finally looks up, scanning Shaq's oversized frame with mild annoyance and disgust. After sizing him up, Todd had finalized that he was nobody important and he wouldn't be able to afford the food. Todd didn't see a potential customer. He saw a black man in a hoodie ordering a $40 meal he couldn't afford. "Yeah, sorry, we don't do handouts here," he said with a smirk on his face. Before entering the restaurant, Shaq not only read the reviews, but his personal assistant also did some groundwork on the waiter and found all the reviews to be fact, but he never knew hearing it firsthand would be different. "Excuse me?" Shaq said with a raised eyebrow in curiosity. Not knowing the great mistake he was getting himself into, Todd spoke, reminding him that the restaurant was not some charity joint, as someone like him couldn't afford such an exquisite meal. He came closer to Shaq, whispering that he did not serve people like him unless he paid up front. "That is a $40 worth of meal. We don't serve certain kinds of people unless they actually pay up front," he said. Shaq responded steadily that he was aware of the price but was not going to pay up front. Shaq questioned Todd about when upfront payment of meals was a requirement for customers. He didn't have a response to that but stood still, with his arms folded across, leaning slightly forward as if to exert dominance. "Well, I just want to make sure you don't ditch the restaurant after you've eaten. That will be a problem for us," he said, his arms still folded. Upon hearing this, Shaq still kept his cool. The back-and-forth conversation between Todd and Shaq made other customers start whispering, sensing something was off. Todd, oblivious, continues. "So, unless you have the cash right now, big guy, I suggest you leave," Todd said sarcastically. Shaq took a deep breath. He had been disrespected before, but this, in his own restaurant? Shaq has been kicked out of a restaurant before, but this time it felt different. It was his restaurant, the restaurant he built from scratch. The irony was almost too much for him to bear. His blood was boiling with the desire to lash out, but that wasn't the moment. He came to see the truth for himself, and now that truth was glaring back at him through the smug face of Todd McWells. Instead of causing a scene, he nodded, turned around, and walked out. He could feel the stern look the customers gave him as he walked out the door. But he wasn't done. Immediately he walked out. Shaq stood momentarily recollecting everything that had happened. He then contacted his assistant. He told her to inform the restaurant manager to prepare for his arrival the next day. It took every ounce of self-control for Shaq not to storm back into the restaurant to reveal who he truly is. He couldn't wait to see the look on Todd's face the next day. He thought it was going to be epic, with a bright smile on his face. While eating his dinner at home, Big Shaq couldn't help but recall every word and action of the racist waiter, Todd. He was playing around with his food when he realized something about life. No matter how successful he became or how many millions he made, there were still people who saw him as lesser people like Todd, who would never believe that a man like Shaq could be the owner of Big Chicken Restaurant. The following day, things were about to change at the Big Chicken Restaurant in Los Angeles. Informed about Big Shaq's arrival, the manager prepared his staff and tried to perfect everything before the boss came. Big Shaq arrived at his corporate office early in the morning, wearing one of his finest suits. The crisp green fabric hugged his huge body perfectly, and the polished leather shoes gleamed. As he walked, he felt powerful, not just because of the suit, but because of what he was about to do. No one would ridicule him in the business he had started from scratch, not even someone like Todd. He called his assistant, Mary, into his office to remind the manager, Kevin, that he would arrive in the afternoon. She nodded with a smile and left. She knew that something different was about to happen today. By noon, the Big Chicken restaurant was buzzing with anticipation. The waiters and non-waiting staff were eager to meet the company's face, the ex-NBA player, Big Shaq. Even Todd had gone into overdrive, trying to perfect himself to impress the man who held the keys to his future. He had no idea what was coming to him. When Big Shaq arrived, the atmosphere was much different than the first time. It was lively, and the staff who stayed their distance the day before welcomed him with smiles and steady attention. Todd was at the center, close to the manager. He stood as if he was the assistant to the manager. Shaq sighted him from a distance and shared his head in disappointment. After greeting the staff at the entrance, Shaq walked inside the restaurant and greeted Kevin. "Welcome to Big Chicken, Shaquille O'Neal. We've been expecting you," Kevin said as he shook hands with Shaq. "I have heard about this location and some recent updates about it. Being the first place I started this company, I decided to see how things are by myself," Shaq said with a warm, thick voice. "We run a tight schedule here. Our customers expect nothing but the best, and we deliver high-quality meals to them as per regulations," Kevin responded. Shaq responded with a nod. Shaq faced Todd with a smile. For a second, Todd scanned Shaq's face. He looked familiar, but he pushed the thought aside. To him, this was a completely different man. This was his boss, someone who controlled his future, an ex-NBA player, not the stranger he had met and ridiculed the day before. As Shaq shook hands with Todd, the moment's weight was settling between them like a live wire. Todd couldn't recognize him, not immediately at least. To Todd's surprise, Shaq narrated how he had come by the restaurant the day before, but had not received the warm welcome he had now. Todd's smile wavered. He didn't quite understand what his boss was talking about. "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. It was probably a misunderstanding," he responded. "You told me you don't serve certain kinds of people, is that right?" Shaq said. This response destabilized Todd completely. At that point of realization, he wished the ground could open and swallow him whole instead. He could not run away from what was coming at him. I didn't know. Todd responded nervously with shame. Shaq, who couldn't hold his disappointment any longer, cut him off. Whatever Todd had to say next didn't matter. Shaq built the restaurant on respect. What made him different from the competitors was that everyone was welcome, no exception. "Enough! You disrespected the very people we serve. And worse, you did it in my name," Shaq said as the room stayed silent, anticipating what would happen next. Todd looks down in shame and fear, now knowing what is coming for him. Shaq then faced Kevin, who had turned a blind eye to the unruly actions of someone he had kept under him. He was disappointed in the manager for not doing anything in such situations. The manager was no leader. Kevin couldn't stand being portrayed as the villain for standing against Todd's racist actions. Todd didn't have any words to say. He immediately fell on Shaq's feet and wept bitterly. He claimed he was sorry and had realized his mistake. He hoped that pleading with his boss might be needed to save his job. The manager also joined in on the pleading. Have they finally realized their mistakes and wrongdoings? Shaq thought in his mind. Shaq had decided to fire Todd, but he did not anticipate how the situation would turn out. He decided to give in to the pleading. If this action continues, Todd, there won't be another chance. You will be fired, Shaq said in an audible voice. And when you are fired, I will see to it personally that no similar industry will hire you, Shaq sternly warned. I will be keeping an eye on the reviews. If there is any slip-up, you are out, he continued. Shaq didn't stop there. He apologized to the staff and customers, promising better training and a fresh start. Big Chicken was built on love, respect, and good food. There was no place for hate. He made sure his personal assistant saw to it that all other branches had the needed training to serve their customers, no matter who they were. Later that day, Shaq sits in the same booth where he was disrespected, biting into a Shaq Attack chicken sandwich with a smile. Customers cheer, take pictures, and thank him for stepping in. 3 weeks later, Shaq came into the restaurant just to see how things were run. He was impressed with the current environment and saw Todd doing his job with a smile and a merrier spirit. A racist waiter had tried to throw the real boss out of his own restaurant. But in the end, the only person that got served was him. If you were Big Shaq, would you have let the waiter go instead? Let us know your opinion in the comments section below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and click on notification bell. Thank you and see you in the next one.